The sharp crack of a slap echoed through the Callahan family's grand parlor as Nora's cheek stung from her father's blow. At 19, she stood before her family with shoulders squared despite the tears threatening to spill, her hands instinctively shielding her swollen belly. "You've brought shame upon this house," Thomas Callahan roared, his face flushed with rage beneath his silver-streaked hair. "No daughter of mine carries a bastard child." The year was 1878, and Sweetwater, Wyoming Territory, was a place where reputations were everything. The Callahans were among the most respected families in the region, their cattle ranch one of the largest and most successful. Thomas Callahan had built his empire through sweat and ruthlessness, and he wouldn't let his unwed daughter's condition tarnish decades of hard work. "Father, please," Nora pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have nowhere to go." Her mother, Eleanor, sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, her eyes downcast, unwilling to meet her daughter's desperate gaze. Nora's two brothers stood silently by the fireplace, one studying the floor, the other watching with cold judgment that mirrored their father's. "You should have thought of that before you spread your legs for some drifter," Thomas spat. "I want you gone by morning. Take what you can carry and nothing more." "The child deserves better than to suffer for my mistakes," Nora said, finding strength somewhere deep within herself. "That bastard is no concern of mine," her father declared, turning his back to her, "nor is its mother any longer." That night, in the solitude of her bedroom, Nora packed what little she could into a single trunk: some clothes, a few treasured books, the locket her grandmother had given her, and the small amount of money she'd saved. As she folded a shawl her mother had knitted for her last Christmas, a soft knock sounded at her door. It was her younger brother, James, his eyes red-rimmed. At 17, he still had the softness of youth that their father had long beaten out of their older brother. "I can't help you stay," he said, pressing a small pouch into her hand, "but I want you to have this." Inside was every cent he'd saved from working on the ranch. Nora embraced him, knowing it might be the last time. "Write to me when you're settled," he whispered. "Father need never know." Dawn broke cold and clear as Nora stood at the edge of the Callahan property, her trunk beside her, waiting for the weekly stagecoach that would take her away from the only home she'd ever known. Her hand rested on her 7-month belly, feeling the child within move, as if sensing her despair. The distant rumble of hooves caught her attention, but it wasn't the stagecoach approaching. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the rising sun. As he drew closer, Nora recognized the broad shoulders and easy posture of Dawson Reed, one of the cowboys who worked the neighboring Hayes Ranch. They'd exchanged words at town socials and church gatherings, nothing more. He was known as a reliable hand, skilled with horses and cattle alike, but quiet and keeping mostly to himself. His dark hair curled from beneath his hat, and his eyes, a deep blue that reminded Nora of summer skies, locked onto hers as he reined his horse to a stop. "Miss Callahan," he greeted, tipping his hat. His gaze moved briefly to her belly, then back to her face without judgment. "You're out early." "I'm leaving," she replied simply, seeing no reason to hide what would soon be common knowledge throughout the territory. Dawson dismounted, his movements fluid despite his tall frame. "Leaving for where, if I might ask? I don't know yet." The admission hung in the cold morning air. "Somewhere my child and I can start fresh." He nodded slowly, studying her face with those perceptive eyes. "And the father? Gone." Nora swallowed hard. He was passing through last autumn, made promises he never intended to keep. The stagecoach appeared in the distance, a cloud of dust announcing its approach. Dawson looked from it to Nora, then to her solitary trunk. "Miss Callahan, Nora," he said, removing his hat, revealing the full thickness of his dark hair. "I don't mean to presume, but a woman in your condition shouldn't be traveling alone to an uncertain future." "I have no choice," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You do," he countered. "I have a small place, nothing fancy, but it's mine. I bought it last year with my savings, thinking to start my own spread someday. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I could use help around the place, and you and your child would have a roof over your heads. Nora stared at him, stunned by the unexpected offer. Why would you do that for someone you barely know? Dawson replaced his hat, adjusting it as he considered his answer. My mother found herself in a similar situation once. No one offered her help. His eyes met hers again. I'm not offering charity, Miss Callahan, just a fair arrangement between neighbors. The stagecoach was drawing closer. Nora had seconds to decide her future. People will talk, she warned. A small smile touched his lips. People always talk. Question is whether we give them reason to or not. He gestured to her trunk. What do you say? My place is about 5 miles north. It's modest, but the land has good water and decent grazing. Heart-pounding, Nora made her decision. All right, Mr. Reed. Dawson, he corrected, lifting her trunk with ease and securing it to his horse. He helped her mount, his hands strong and respectful at her waist, then climbed up behind her. As the stagecoach rolled past, the driver casting a curious glance their way, Nora felt something unexpected, a flicker of hope where before there had been only despair. Dawson's small place turned out to be a sturdy cabin nestled in a valley with a creek running alongside it. A barn stood nearby, and a corral held 3 horses who nickered in greeting as they approached. The land around was indeed good, grassy and dotted with cottonwoods, sheltered by hills that glowed golden in the morning light. It's not much, Dawson said as he helped her down, but it's peaceful. It's beautiful, Nora replied honestly. Inside, the cabin was clean and simple, one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. Handmade furniture showed Dawson's skill with woodworking, and shelves held a surprising number of books. You'll take my room, he said, opening one door to reveal a neatly kept space with a bed, chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the creek. I'll sleep in the spare room. I can't take your bedroom, Nora protested. You're carrying a child, he stated simply. You need the comfort more than I do. Over the following days, they settled into an arrangement that worked for both of them. Nora took over the cooking and mending, grateful to have useful tasks that didn't overtax her in her condition. Dawson worked from dawn to dusk, tending his small herd of cattle, mending fences, and making improvements to the cabin and barn. They spoke little at first, sharing meals in comfortable silence. But gradually, as April turned to May and Nora's time grew closer, conversations began to flow more freely. Do you know if it'll be a boy or girl? Dawson asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in fiery hues. No, Nora smiled, her hand on her belly. Though my mother always said a boy rides high and a girl rides low. And yours? Low, she admitted, but old wives' tales aren't always right, he nodded thoughtfully. Either way, they'll need a name. Daniel for a boy after my grandfather, Nora said. For a girl, she hesitated. I haven't decided. You have time yet, Dawson assured her, but time moved more swiftly than expected. 3 nights later, Nora woke to sharp pains and dampness beneath her. The baby was coming, weeks earlier than she'd calculated. Dawson, she called out, fear making her voice crack. He appeared in the doorway instantly, as if he hadn't been sleeping at all. One look at her face told him everything. I'll fetch Mrs. Buchanan from the next farm, he said, already pulling on his boots. She's delivered half the babies in the county. There's no time, Nora gasped as another contraction seized her. It's happening too fast. Dawson's face paled, but he squared his shoulders. Then we'll manage. He built up the fire, put water to boil, and gathered clean linens with a calm efficiency that belied his obvious nerves. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort for Nora. Dawson stayed by her side, wiping her brow, offering water and quiet encouragement. His hands, usually so confident with ropes and reins, trembled slightly as he supported her. As dawn broke, a lusty cry filled the cabin. Dawson's face transformed with wonder as he held the tiny, red-faced infant. "A girl," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a daughter, Nora." He placed the swaddled newborn in Nora's arms, and she gazed down at the perfect face, overcome with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "She's beautiful," Dawson whispered, perched on the edge of the bed. "She is," Nora agreed through her tears. She looked up at the man who had shown her more kindness in 2 months than she'd known in years. "I'd like to name her Deanna, after your mother." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something deeper, more profound. "That would be an honor," he said softly. "My mother would have liked that." 3 days later, a wagon approached the cabin. Dawson met the visitors outside the Reverend Michaels from Sweetwater and his wife. "Mr. Reed," the Reverend greeted stiffly. "We've heard rumors about a young woman living here unchaperoned, and now word reaches us of a baby." Dawson stood tall, his stance protective. "You've heard correctly that Miss Callahan and her daughter are staying here." Mrs. Michaels peered past him toward the cabin. "And what exactly is your relationship to Miss Callahan?" Before Dawson could answer, the cabin door opened, and Nora emerged with Deanna in her arms, wrapped in a blanket Dawson had purchased from a traveling peddler. "Reverend Mrs. Michaels," she acknowledged, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Miss Callahan," the Reverend said, his tone severe. "Your situation here is most irregular. Your family has washed their hands of you, but the community cannot ignore such impropriety." "There is no impropriety," Dawson stated firmly. "Nora is my wife." Nora's head whipped toward him, eyes wide with shock. The Reverend looked equally startled. "Your wife? Since when?" "We were married by a traveling preacher 3 months back," Dawson continued smoothly. "We haven't had the chance to announce it properly, what with the baby coming and all." "I see," the Reverend said slowly, clearly skeptical. "And the child?" Dawson moved to stand beside Nora, placing a gentle hand on Deanna's head. "My daughter," he said, with such conviction that even Nora almost believed it. "Born a bit early but strong as can be." The Reverend and his wife exchanged glances. "Well then," Mrs. Michaels said with forced brightness, "we should welcome the newest Reed properly. May I hold her?" As Deanna was passed to Mrs. Michaels, the tension eased slightly. The Reverend's wife cooed over the baby while her husband continued to eye Dawson suspiciously. "We'd be pleased if you'd officially bless our marriage and record it in the church books," Dawson added. "Being so far from town, we'd welcome the proper recognition." The Reverend hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Sunday after services would be appropriate. Bring the necessary documentation." After they departed, Nora turned to Dawson, the baby back in her arms. "Why did you say that?" "It seemed the simplest solution," he replied, suddenly looking uncertain. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. You claimed another man's child as your own," she said softly. "Why would you do that?" Dawson ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize when he was working through difficult thoughts. "Deanna deserves better than to be known as illegitimate, and you deserve better than the judgment that would follow you both." He paused. "I can go to town tomorrow, explain that I misspoke." "No," Nora interrupted. "I'm just trying to understand what this means." "It means whatever you want it to mean," he said honestly. "We could make it official for Deanna's sake. Or I can help you get established elsewhere, if that's what you prefer." Nora studied his face, the earnest blue eyes, the strong jawline softened now with concern. In 2 months, he had shown her more kindness and respect than any man she'd known. "Would it be so terrible?" she asked quietly. "Being married to me?" Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps. "No," he said simply. "It wouldn't be terrible at all." On Sunday, they drove to Sweetwater in Dawson's wagon. Deanna slept peacefully in a basket lined with soft blankets, and Nora wore her best dress, freshly pressed. Dawson had trimmed his beard and donned a clean shirt and string tie. If anyone noticed that Nora's gold ring looked newly purchased, they didn't comment. The ceremony was brief, conducted after the regular service with only the church deacons as witnesses. Nora spoke her vows in a clear voice, surprised at how right the words felt. When Dawson promised to love and cherish her until death parted them, his eyes held hers with such sincerity that her breath caught. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared, still somewhat dubious but officially satisfied. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As they left the church, a few townspeople offered congratulations, though Nora didn't miss the calculating looks that followed them. They were halfway to the wagon when a familiar voice called out, "Nora." She turned to see her brother James, taller somehow in the months since she'd left home, his face a mix of relief and uncertainty. "James," she breathed, passing Deanna to Dawson and embracing her brother tightly. "I've been worried sick," James said, "when you didn't write." He trailed off as his gaze fell on the baby in Dawson's arms, then shifted to the gold band on Nora's finger. "James, this is my husband, Dawson Reed," Nora said, the words still new and strange on her tongue. "And our daughter, Deanna." Understanding dawned in her brother's eyes, but he played along seamlessly. "Mr. Reed," he said, extending his hand. "It seems I have a brother-in-law I didn't know about. And I have a brother-in-law I'm pleased to meet," Dawson replied, shaking James's hand firmly. "Does father know you're here?" Nora asked quietly. James shook his head. "He and mother are visiting the Hendersons in Cheyenne. I rode in for supplies." He hesitated. "He hasn't spoken your name since you left." Pain lanced through Nora, but she nodded, having expected nothing less. "And mother." "She cries when she thinks no one's watching," James admitted, "but she won't defy him." "I understand," Nora said, though the hurt was no less for the understanding. "I should go," James said reluctantly, eyeing the town, "but I want to see you again, meet my niece properly." "Our place is north of town," Dawson offered. 5 miles up Cottonwood Creek. You're welcome anytime." James nodded gratefully. "I'll find a way." He embraced Nora once more, whispered, "Be happy," in her ear, and was gone. The ride home was quiet, both Nora and Dawson lost in their thoughts. The spring afternoon was warm, the landscape lush with new growth, and Deanna slept contentedly in her basket. It wasn't until they were nearly home that Dawson broke the silence. "I meant what I said in there," he said, his eyes on the trail ahead. "Every word of it." Nora turned to study his profile, strong and steady in the golden light. "I know," she replied softly. "So did I." That night, after Deanna was fed and sleeping in the cradle Dawson had crafted for her, they faced the awkward question of sleeping arrangements. Dawson had been sleeping in the spare room since Nora's arrival, giving her the master bedroom for her comfort. "Nothing has to change," he assured her, standing in the doorway between the main room and the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "I don't expect— We're married now," Nora interrupted gently. "In the eyes of God and the community." "On paper," he agreed, "but I didn't do this to." He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. "To claim rights as a husband," Nora finished for him. "I know that, Dawson." She took a step toward him. "But perhaps we could start by sharing the room, at least. It seems silly for you to sleep on that narrow cot when there's a perfectly good bed." Relief and something else, anticipation, perhaps crossed his features. "If you're sure." "I am," she said, and meant it. That night, they lay side by side in the darkness, a careful space between them, listening to Deanna's soft breathing from her cradle in the corner. It was strange, Nora thought, how quickly life could change. 3 months ago, she'd been a ruined woman with no prospects. Now she was a wife and mother with a home and a husband who, if not a lover yet, was certainly a friend. "Dawson," she whispered. Thank you for everything." His hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "No need for thanks between us," he murmured. "We're family now." Family. The word settled over her like a blessing, filling spaces inside her she hadn't realized were empty. Summer arrived with long, golden days. Deanna thrived, growing plumper and more alert by the day. She had Nora's honey-colored hair and, to Dawson's constant delight, seemed to have inherited his blue eyes. "Raid eyes," he would say proudly when visitors commented on the baby's striking gaze. And there were visitors' neighbors bringing gifts for the new baby, ranchers stopping by to discuss grazing rights or water access, even the Reverend's wife making an appearance with a quilt for Deanna. Gradually, the story of their hasty marriage became accepted fact, embellished with romantic details supplied by those who loved a good tale. James visited when he could slip away, bringing news from the Callahan ranch and playing the doting uncle to Deanna. On his third visit, he brought word that their mother wished to see the baby. "She won't come here," James explained. "Father would never allow it, but she'll be at the Founders' Day picnic next month. Father always leaves early to conduct business." The annual Founders' Day celebration was Sweetwater's biggest social event, drawing ranchers, townspeople, and outlying homesteaders for a day of food, games, and music. Nora had attended every year of her life until her banishment. "I don't know if I should go," she confessed to Dawson that night. "Father might be there. Do you want to see your mother?" he asked simply. "Yes," Nora admitted. "Despite everything, I miss her." "Then we'll go," Dawson decided. "Your father can hardly make a scene at a public gathering, not without damaging his own reputation. And Deanna should know her grandmother." On the morning of the picnic, Nora dressed Deanna in the christening gown Mrs. Buchanan had given them, a beautiful confection of white lawn and lace. She herself wore a blue calico dress that Dawson had surprised her with the previous week, ordered from a catalog and delivered by the mercantile owner. "You look beautiful," Dawson said when she emerged from the bedroom, Deanna in her arms. Nora blushed, still unused to compliments. In the 4 months since their wedding, their relationship had evolved into a comfortable partnership, with growing affection on both sides. They shared the bed each night, sometimes talking long into the darkness, sometimes simply taking comfort in each other's presence. Dawson had never pressed for more, though Nora had begun to wonder what it might be like if he did. The town square was festooned with bunting and flags when they arrived. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family, and a small band played lively tunes. Nora felt eyes following them as they made their way through the crowd, but the greetings they received were mostly friendly. It was Mrs. Buchanan who first spotted Nora Callahan and discreetly pointed her out to Nora. The older woman stood alone near the lemonade table, her face lighting up when she saw her daughter and granddaughter. "You go on," Dawson encouraged. "I'll be right over there with the men, talking about cattle prices and pretending to be interested." Nora approached her mother slowly, heart hammering. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached for the baby. "Oh, Nora," she breathed. "She's perfect." "Her name is Deanna," Nora said, carefully transferring the infant to her grandmother's arms. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she gazed down at Deanna's face. "She has the Callahan chin," she observed. "Just like you and James." She looked up at Nora. "Are you well? Truly?" "I am," Nora assured her. "Dawson is a good man. We have a good life." Eleanor glanced across the square to where Dawson stood with a group of ranchers. "I'm glad," she said softly. "Your father," she broke off, pain crossing her features. "I know," Nora said simply. They spoke for nearly half an hour, Eleanor reluctant to relinquish Deanna even for a moment. It was only when someone called out, "Thomas Callahan's coming," that fear flooded her face. "I should go," she said, pressing a final kiss to Deanna's forehead before handing her back to Nora. "Your father wouldn't," she stopped, straightening her shoulders. "It doesn't matter. I've met my granddaughter now." "Mother," Nora began, but Eleanor was already turning away. "Be happy, my darling," she whispered, echoing James's words from months earlier. Thomas Callahan appeared at the edge of the square, his imposing figure drawing attention even in the crowded gathering. His eyes scanned the festivities, narrowing when they landed on Nora and the baby. For a moment, it seemed he might approach, but then Dawson was at Nora's side, his arm protective around her waist. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Nora replied, though her heart was racing. but perhaps we should move to another part of the square. They had just turned to go when Thomas's voice boomed across the space between them. So the rumors are true. You've found yourself a husband to claim your bastard. The buzz of conversation around them died. Nora felt Dawson stiffen beside her, but his voice when he spoke was level. Mr. Callahan, I'd appreciate you not referring to my daughter that way. Thomas's eyes flicked to Dawson, dismissive. Your daughter? We both know that's not true, boy. Dawson passed Deanna to Nora and stepped forward, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard. Deanna Reed is my daughter in every way that matters, he said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. I'd be obliged if you'd respect that, sir. Thomas snorted derisively. Respect. For a cowhand playing house with my disgraced daughter. Respect for your granddaughter, at the very least, Dawson countered. And for the woman who bore her your own flesh and blood. A murmur ran through the onlookers. Thomas's face darkened as he realized the public opinion was not swinging his way. Alina appeared at his side, her hand on his arm a silent plea. Thomas, please, she whispered. Not here. For a tense moment, it seemed Thomas might ignore her, but then he gave a curt nod. We're leaving, he announced. As he turned, he added over his shoulder, she made her choice. Let her live with it. Alina cast one last, longing glance at Nora and Deanna before following her husband. The crowd slowly dispersed, conversations resuming, though Nora knew the confrontation would be the talk of Sweetwater for weeks to come. I'm sorry, Dawson said as they made their way back to their wagon. I shouldn't have spoken to your father that way. No, Nora said firmly. You were right to defend Deanna and me. She looked up at him, seeing the tension still in his jawline. Thank you for that. His expression softened as he helped her into the wagon. Always. The word hung between them, a promise more binding than their hasty vows had been. That night, after Deanna was asleep, they sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Nora's thoughts kept returning to the confrontation with her father, to the way Dawson had stood firm beside her. Did you mean what you said today? She asked finally. About Deanna being your daughter in every way that matters. Of course, Dawson replied without hesitation. I couldn't love her more if she had my blood. The simple declaration moved Nora deeply. You've given us so much, she said. A home, a name, protection. I feel like I've given you nothing in return. Dawson turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. Nothing. Nora, you've given this place life. Before you came, it was just shelter. Now it's a home. He gestured toward the cabin where Deanna slept. You've given me a family. Something I never thought I'd have. Why not? She asked softly. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant hills. My mother died when I was 12, he finally said. After that, it was just my father and me, and he was a hard man, drank too much, worked too little. We drifted from ranch to ranch, never staying long. His voice grew distant with memory. When I was 16, he got in a fight over cards in some saloon. The other fellow shot him dead. Oh, Dawson, Nora breathed, reaching for his hand. After that, I was on my own, he continued. Worked my way up from mucking stalls to breaking horses, saved every penny I could, bought this place last year. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the first stars. But it was empty until you came, just a man and his ambitions, nothing more. And now, Nora asked, her heart beating faster. His hand turned in hers, fingers intertwining. Now I have everything I never knew I wanted. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Nora found herself leaning toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. Dawson hesitated, then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning. But when Nora's lips parted beneath his, something changed. Dawson's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and needful. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for a long time, he admitted. Why didn't you? Nora asked, her hands still resting on his broad shoulders. I didn't want you to think it was expected, that I'd helped you only to, he broke off, struggling for words. I know better than that, Nora assured him. I know you. His smile in the darkness was a thing of beauty. Do you? He asked softly. Do you know how much I've come to care for you, Nora Reed? How I wake each morning grateful to find you beside me, even if it's only to sleep. Show me, she whispered, and kissed him again. They moved inside, checking on Diana before retreating to their bedroom. There, in the soft glow of the lamp, they discovered each other anew not as reluctant housemates or friends bound by circumstance, but as man and wife in truth. Dawson's hands were gentle as he undressed her, his eyes reverent as he took in her body, changed by childbirth, but no less beautiful for it. Nora found courage she hadn't known she possessed, helping him remove his own clothes, exploring the hard planes of his chest and the strength of his arms. When he finally covered her body with his own, Nora felt not the desperate rush of her previous experience, but a slow building wonder. Dawson took his time, ensuring her pleasure before seeking his own, and when they finally moved together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. After, as they lay tangled in the sheets, his arm a comforting weight across her waist, Nora realized something fundamental had shifted between them. This was no longer a marriage of convenience, a solution to a problem. It was real as the child sleeping in the next room, as real as the man whose heartbeat she could feel against her back. I love you, she whispered into the darkness, not sure if he was still awake to hear it, his arm tightened around her. And I love you, he murmured against her hair. Have almost from the first. With those words, the last pieces of Nora's broken world fell into place, reforming into something stronger and more beautiful than before. The seasons turned, summer giving way to autumn, autumn to winter. Diana took her first steps on a crisp November day, toddling from Nora's arms to Dawson's waiting hands, her face alight with triumph. By her first birthday, she was chattering in a language only she fully understood, though Mama and Dada were clear favorites. Dawson's small herd grew as he applied his knowledge of cattle breeding, selecting for hardiness and quality. The money from his first major sale allowed him to add a room to the cabin, a proper nursery for Diana, with a window facing east so she could wake with the sun. Nora planted a garden that flourished under her care, and started selling preserves and baked goods in town, building a reputation for quality that brought customers from as far as Cheyenne. The extra income helped during lean times and gave her a sense of contribution to their growing prosperity. James visited regularly, sometimes bringing letters from a leaner that she smuggled past Thomas's watchful eye. The elder Callahan remained intransigent in his rejection of Nora, but his wife's secret correspondence was filled with love for her daughter and granddaughter. Father's heart condition is worsening, James reported during one winter visit as they sat around the fire after Diana had been put to bed. The doctor says he needs to ease his burdens. Will he sell the ranch? Dawson asked, knowing how much the Callahan spread meant to Thomas. James shook his head. Not while he breathes, but he's looking for someone to help manage it. He hesitated, glancing at Nora. I've suggested he consider bringing family back into the fold. He'll never accept me, Nora said quietly. Or Diana. Maybe not, James agreed. But he's getting older and Mother works on him constantly. She misses you terribly. Nora leaned into Dawson's side, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I miss her too, but my life is here now. The subject was dropped, but later that night, as they lay in bed, Dawson broached it again. Would you want to reconcile with your father, if he offered? Nora considered the question seriously. A year ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. I was so hurt by his rejection, so desperate for his approval. She turned to face Dawson in the darkness. But now, I'd welcome peace between us, especially for Diana's sake. But I don't need his approval anymore. I know my worth. Dawson gathered her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You're the strongest woman I know, Nora Reed. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, bringing with it unexpected news. James rode in one afternoon, his expression a mix of gravity and hope. "Father's had another episode," he announced as soon as he'd dismounted. "A bad one. The doctor doesn't think he'll last the month." Nora sank onto the porch step, Deanna playing at her feet. "Has he asked for me?" James shook his head. "Not in so many words, but Mother begs you to come. She says she can't bear for him to go to his grave with this rift unhealed." Dawson, who had been repairing tack nearby, joined them on the porch. "What did you want to do?" he asked Nora, his hand warm on her shoulder. She looked up at him, then at Deanna, now nearly 18 months old and the image of carefree joy. "I want my daughter to know her family," she said finally. "All of her family. And I want peace, if it's possible." The Callahan ranch house looked exactly as Nora remembered it, grand by territorial standards, with its wraparound porch and tall windows. But as their wagon approached, she felt none of the dread or shame that had haunted her last moments here. Instead, she felt a calm certainty, Deanna secure in her arms and Dawson steady beside her. Alina met them at the door, her face lighting up at the sight of her granddaughter. "Oh, my darlings," she breathed, embracing Nora awkwardly around the child. "I've prayed for this day." "How is he?" Nora asked as they were ushered inside. "Weak," Alina replied, "but still stubborn as ever." She led them to the parlor, the very room where Nora had been disowned 2 years earlier. "Wait here. Let me prepare him." When Alina returned, her expression was guarded. "He'll see you," she said. "Just you for now." Nora handed Deanna to Dawson, drawing strength from his encouraging nod, and followed her mother upstairs to the master bedroom. Thomas Callahan lay propped against pillows, his once robust frame diminished, his face gray with illness. But his eyes, when they fixed on Nora, were as sharp as ever. "So you've come," he said, his voice a shadow of its former strength. "Yes, Father," Nora replied simply. He studied her for a long moment. "You look well." "I am well." "Your husband treats you right," the question surprised her. "He does, better than I deserve sometimes." Thomas nodded slowly. "James speaks highly of him, says he's built something worthwhile out of that patch of land." "We both have," Nora corrected gently. Another nod, this one accompanied by a grimace of pain. Alina moved to adjust his pillows, but he waved her away impatiently. "I was wrong," he said finally, the words clearly costing him. "Not about everything. What you did," he broke off, shaking his head. "But I was wrong to cast you out, to deny my own blood." Nora felt tears rising but blinked them back. "Thank you for saying that." "I want to meet her," Thomas continued. "My granddaughter, and your husband." When Dawson entered carrying Deanna, Thomas's eyes widened slightly. The cowboy cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered, his manner respectful but not subservient as he approached the bed. "Mr. Callahan," he greeted, shifting Deanna to one arm so he could extend his hand. Thomas took it, his grip weak but deliberate. "Read." His gaze moved to Deanna, who was regarding him curiously with those striking blue eyes. "She has the Callahan look about her." "She does," Dawson agreed. "Strong-willed, too." A hint of a smile touched Thomas's lips. "A family trait," he beckoned weakly. "Let me see her closer." Deanna went to her grandfather without fear, allowing him to examine her face with an intensity that might have frightened another child. But she simply stared back, eventually reaching out to pat his whiskered cheek with a chubby hand. "Papa sick?" she asked, her limited vocabulary somehow finding the perfect words. Something in Thomas's expression crumbled. "Yes, little one," he said hoarsely. "Papa is sick." When they left the room an hour later, Alina was weeping openly, but her tears seemed as much joy as sorrow. "He wants you to stay," she told Nora and Dawson. "All of you, for as long as he has." They stayed for 3 weeks. Thomas rallied briefly, well enough to be carried downstairs to sit in the sunshine with Deanna on his lap, listening to her chatter. He spoke at length with Dawson about cattle and land management, and on one memorable afternoon asked to see the account books for the ranch. "The place will go to your brother," he told Nora as they sat together one evening, Deanna already asleep upstairs. "He's earned it. But there's the east section, good water, good grazing, 500 acres adjoining your husband's land." He fixed her with a steady gaze. "It should go to my granddaughter." Nora stared at him, stunned. "Father, that's incredibly generous, but it's not generosity," Thomas interrupted. "It's justice, what should have been yours from the start." He reached for her hand, his own papery and cool. "I can't undo what's done, girl. But I can try to make it right." Thomas Callahan died peacefully in his sleep 2 days later, with Alina holding one hand and Nora the other. His last coherent words had been a gruff, "You chose well after all, daughter." The funeral was well attended, the Callahan name drawing mourners from throughout the territory. Nora stood between her mother and Dawson, Deanna solemn in her father's arms, as the Reverend spoke of Thomas's contributions to the community, his strength of character, his dedication to family. If some noticed the irony in that last tribute, they were kind enough not to mention it. After the burial, the details of Thomas's will were revealed: the main ranch to James, with provisions for Alina's comfort. 500 acres to Deanna Reed, to be managed by her parents until she came of age, and a surprising bequest to Dawson: Thomas's prized breeding bull and 2 of his best horses. "He respected you," James told Dawson as they shared a quiet drink on the porch that evening. "Said you were the kind of man he would have chosen for Nora, if he'd been thinking clearly." Dawson glanced through the window to where Nora sat with her mother, Deanna sleeping in her lap. "I'm the lucky one," he said simply. As summer ripened into another autumn, Nora and Dawson incorporated the new land into their growing ranch. The additional acreage allowed them to increase their herd substantially, and the quality bloodlines from Thomas's bull improved their stock. They built a new, larger house on a rise overlooking both properties, with plenty of room for their expanding family, for Nora was expecting again, their child due in the early spring. "A boy this time, I think," she told Dawson as they lay in bed one night, his hand resting on her gently rounded belly. "He kicks like a mule." "Poor thing, taking after his father already," Dawson chuckled, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "I hope he does," Nora said seriously, turning to face him. "I hope he has your kindness, your strength, your integrity." She touched his face tenderly. "Do you ever regret it, taking us in when you did?" Dawson's expression grew thoughtful. "I've asked myself that sometimes, wondering what kind of man makes such a decision." He smiled, pulling her closer. "The kind who recognizes what's important, I suppose. I saw a woman in need, yes, but I also saw courage and dignity in the face of terrible circumstances." His hand moved to her belly again. "And now look what we've built together." "A family," Nora murmured. "A family," he agreed. "Something neither of us thought we'd have again." When their son was born the following April, Daniel Thomas Reed, named for Nora's grandfather, and, in a gesture of reconciliation, her father, the christening was attended by Alina, James and his new wife, and half the county besides. The celebration afterward, held at what people had begun calling the Double R Ranch, lasted well into the evening. As twilight softened the landscape, Nora found Dawson standing alone on the porch, watching Deanna chase fireflies in the yard, her laughter carrying on the gentle breeze. "Happy?" she asked, joining him with Daniel sleeping against her shoulder. Dawson smiled, the same smile that had first given her hope on that desperate morning by the stagecoach stop. "More than I ever thought possible," he said, drawing her into the circle of his arm. Together, they watched their daughter dance in the gathering dusk, their son's steady breathing a counterpoint to the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind in the cottonwoods. From such fragile beginnings, a desperate young woman, a solitary cowboy, and a child born of another man's broken promises, they had forged something unbreakable. A family bound not by blood alone, but by choice and love and the courage to begin again. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and their ranch prospered, They would sometimes look back on that fateful meeting and marvel at how close they had come to missing each other entirely, how a small act of kindness had changed the course of both their lives. "Some would call it chance," Dawson would say, watching their children, 4 of them eventually, Deanna followed by Daniel, then Emma, and finally Joseph, playing in the yard of the home they had built together. "I call it providence," Nora would answer, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. And neither of them would ever forget that spring morning when a disgraced young woman with nowhere to turn had found, in a stranger's compassion, the beginning of a love story that would define them both.